Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk Assassin's Creed, your number one podcast for all things Assassin's Creed. The first thing I need to explain is why you are not hearing Declan's voice do his usual show intro. There's a little bit to explain in a moment in terms of our schedule, and we wanted to record tonight when we're recording, but unfortunately he's got some family things on which couldn't be cancelled. So I'm taking the lead on the show tonight, which is a new experience for me. And I must admit, I'm feeling a little bit nervous, but let's launch into the episode. I think this is going to be a good one. So welcome to episode 142 of Let's Talk Assassin's Creed. Before we get into the main topic of tonight, I just want to give a very small disclaimer. So over the last month or so, Declan and I have been sent a number of novels, early previews and final versions from publisher Aconite Books to read and to review at some point in the future on the show. But just be aware, when you're listening to this, those previews, those books were given without any kinds of commitment. We didn't sign any contract. We can give entirely our own opinion. So if we're saying they're great, we really mean it. And likewise, if we're saying they're not great, we really mean it. It was all done just as purely as a resource for us to read and understand, and at some point in the future discuss on the show. So there are a number of novels that have been released this year in the Assassin's Creed franchise, and tonight we're going to be talking about a book that releases, I think, in the next 2 weeks, but we'll clarify that date very, very shortly, and let me explain why. Because we're going to be talking about the new book, The Magus Conspiracy, which I may have pronounced wrong, and there's really no better way to chat about this book than really by talking to the author. So welcome to the show, Kate Heartfield.
Hello, I'm very happy to be here, and that is how I pronounce it. I think there are a number of ways that one can pronounce it, but let's go with Magus. Yes, I'm very happy to be here.
Great. Thanks for joining the show, and thanks for accepting my invite. Magus Conspiracy. Try and get that straight in my head. Kate, tell us a bit about yourself. This is not your first novel, so tell us a bit about your history and so on.
Yeah, so I'm a writer in Ottawa, Canada, and I've written a lot of short fiction and a couple of pieces of interactive fiction. And I used to be a newspaper journalist, so that's my background. And I do have some other books out. So my first novel came out in 2018, and I've published some novellas. And this year I had a big historical fantasy come out called The Embroidered Book, which is a historical fantasy about Marie Antoinette. And The Magus Conspiracy is my first time writing anything for Assassin's Creed, and it's also my first time writing anything that is a tie-in novel and not purely my own work. So it was an enormous privilege to be able to play in this sandbox. I've had a lot of fun.
I have so many thoughts and questions to cover, but the first thing I wanted to ask, when I must admit I haven't read your previous books, so I must make that clear. But I did read the summaries of the plots on your website, and it seems to me clearly you're interested in or you're inspired by. Would it be historical fantasy? Is that the right way to categorize your earlier work?
Yeah, definitely a lot of historical fantasy and, more broadly, I guess you could say speculative fiction in historical settings. So alternate history. Two of my novellas are time travel. So historical
Yes.
settings, but with a little bit of a different kind of speculative twist. So definitely that seems to be what I'm comfortable with, especially in long form. Those are the sorts of ideas that I get, are historical settings with a bit of a twist. So when this possibility came up to work on Assassin's Creed, it just seemed like the perfect thing for me because I am, I love working in these sorts of settings and I love Assassin's Creed. So it seemed like a dream.
It's as soon as I read the summaries of your other books, I thought, yeah, this historical fantasy, bit of time travel. Assassin's Creed isn't time travel, but sometimes people think it is. It all felt like Assassin's Creed fitted into the genre that you were kind of comfortable writing in or writing about. So what I'm curious, if I could start with maybe a very boring admin question. So when a project like this starts, who talks to who? Do you pitch to Aconite? Does Aconite put the search out for the author with the right stuff to bring this story to life? How does it get started?
Yeah, I imagine there are a bunch of different ways that it can happen. In this case, my agent, Jenny Goloboy, who is fantastic, and we've been together since 2014, so we work very closely together and know each other very well. And she was aware of a possibility that Aconite was looking for someone to write this project, and she mentioned it to me, and I, right out of the gate, you're sort of, signing NDAs, and it's very
Understood.
obviously, yeah. So it's very.
Is it the case where you have to sign an NDA before you can even be told what the project might be?
I think so, if I recall correctly. Yeah,
Yeah,
and that seems
yeah.
to be, I think, in the gaming world. I've written a little bit for video games as well, and that seems very standard. You sort of have to sign an NDA before you say hello, which was totally fine, and we started having conversations then about what the project might actually be, and so I had a sort of overall brief from Aconite of what they were looking for, and they said, if you have any ideas, please go ahead and pitch. And so I came up with a couple of pitch ideas and sent that to them. We went back and forth a few times, and then we got to an outline stage and went back and forth a few times on the outline, to try and get it just to be the strongest possible story, and fit the kind of story that they were looking for. And then Ubisoft had to sign off on it, and they've been really great and really supportive all the way along as well, and never had the sense that they were sort of cramping my style or anything like that. It was very much a sort of collaborative approach, just making sure that I didn't do anything unawares, that I wasn't stepping on anyone's toes or anything like that, and I wasn't, and everything seemed to work out fine. So that's how the process worked for me, and I'm sure there could be other, there are probably as many stories as there are writers out there, but definitely for me it was having an agent who was in that zone between the publisher and me, and could make that connection.
I mean, from my point of view as a consumer, as a reader, I'm so glad it will happen like this. And what I'll say to people listening is we're not going to deliberately try and spoil any major plot points here, although I guess we're going to mention character names. I'm sure we're going to mention overall story. In fact, we'll do that in a moment, but we'll try not to do any specific spoilers. But I'm so glad it happened, because this book is fantastic. The story is fantastic. We have so much to cover, but we'll get into that. So it seems like it worked out well. Just remind me, and for our listeners, when is the book actually published and available?
Yeah, good question. So the paperback is out, well, basically now for the listeners, because it's being released on August 2nd. Not the paperback, I'm sorry, the ebook. So the ebook is out on August 2nd worldwide. So that's, if you've pre-ordered it, it should be landing on your e-reader any moment now. And the paperback is coming out August 16th. With the slight exception that in the UK it will be October 27th, and I believe that's just supply chains and all of the logistics that publishing has to deal with these days.
Understood.
Yeah, and there will be an audiobook, which I believe is also August 16th. So most formats will be early to mid August.
That's great. I'll just make one quick comment there. So that's great to hear there's an audiobook, because I know that not all of the previous Assassin's Creed novels are in audiobook format, and we have friends of the show who they prefer the audio format, and they can't focus on the blocks of text, so they will never read the novel version. So the fact there's an audiobook is great. Just for people listening, so we're recording this on the 1st of August. This episode will actually go out on the 13th. So for some of you listening, the book will already be available. Great. And for others, it will be available in just a few days after this episode is published. So if we wind the clock back, when did you first put, I was going to say pen to paper, but do you really put pen to paper nowadays when you're writing? I'm guessing not.
I don't, but many writers do. But my handwriting's so terrible, I wouldn't be able to read it. Yeah.
So when did it start?
Not terribly long ago, because often with media tie-in writing, it's a little bit faster than other forms of traditional publishing. So, which isn't saying much, because publishing tends to be pretty slow. So let's see, it was a little bit more than a year ago. So it was spring of 2021 when I started this process of pitching and working on the outline with Aconite, and with Gwen Nix, who's my editor there. and Mark Gascoigne, who's also helped and actually ended up editing the book because Gwen was on leave for a while. And they were wonderful. So that was a process of a few months. And then I was really writing the book in autumn of 2021 and finished it in early 2022. So it hasn't been that long, and then it's been a process of getting the cover and copy edits and all of that great stuff.
Is that intervening time? How does it must be so frustrating to know it's basically finished, but no one can enjoy it yet. No one can read it yet.
Yeah, it is. It can seem very long. I think the parts of publishing that seem even longer to me are the parts before that, when you know something and you can't announce it yet.
Gotcha.
Yeah, when you signed a contract and you can't talk about it, that part seems interminable. But yeah, the last parts, when you've finished copy edits and it's gone to proofreading and there's a cover and you know that it's going to be getting sent out to reviewers and that sort of thing soon, it's this weird mix of I can't wait until it's here, and I can't believe the train is going this fast, and oh my goodness, people are going to be reading my work, and it's always a little bit nerve-wracking too.
Let's do maybe a bit of a story summary in a moment, but I think that anyone who reads it, who has at least, to be honest, you've written it in a way that you could have no knowledge of any of the pre-existing characters, universe, and I think this is one of the positives of the book. It assumes no prior knowledge, and it's fantastic. What I also really like about it is it's, how can I explain it? I'm not a literary critic. It's full of Creed stuff throughout. There's discussions on the beliefs of the assassins, the approach of the Templars. You connect the story to little references that we as the gamers would know from the games that we've played. But you never do it in a way that you're sort of beating us over the head with it. At no point is there sort of a big exposition piece that says, welcome to the world of Assassin's Creed. It's just a story and characters that exist. And it just really brings it to life in a fantastic way. And I think anyone that reads it, I hope anyone that reads it feels the same, because certainly myself and Declan, we were reading it over the last couple of weeks. Louise, aka the Nerdy Archer, who's been on our show many times, she was reading it as well, and she loves it. And so far, everyone from our community of Assassin's Creed podcasters and content creators have all loved it. So I think the approach and structure and everything is just fantastic. I wonder, could you give, maybe as spoiler free as possible, could you give us a little plot outline of when is the story set and who are the characters that we follow?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was definitely something that I wanted to do, was write the book in a way that would be accessible to someone who's never played any of the games and has no familiarity with the universe, but also felt like coming home for people who do know the universe as well. So there are some Easter eggs and some references and some discussion of the philosophy that, they'll mean something different to the reader depending on where the reader is coming from. So that was very deliberate for sure. In terms of the overall story, so it takes place in the middle of the 19th century. It starts in 1851, and we have two main characters. One of them, Simeon Price, is a British soldier. He is current when we first meet him. He is on board the HMS Birkenhead, and anyone who knows their naval history will know that it's not going to go well. So he starts out there, and we have Pierrette Arnaud, who is a French equestrian. She's a circus performer who specializes in horseback, being on horseback and doing acrobatic tricks. And she's quite young. She's sort of an older teenager when the book begins. And so neither of them are assassins at the beginning of the story, but they encounter the Brotherhood quite quickly. And the thing that sort of gets the story rolling is a woman named Ada Lovelace, who will, I think, be familiar to many listeners as sort of the foremother of computers. She encounters Pierrette at the Great Exhibition, and they become friends. And as Ada is dying, sadly, which she died quite young in the early 1850s, she bequeaths Pierrette this task to go and find Simeon, because She has some designs for a project that she thinks might be getting into the wrong hands, and she thinks that Simeon can help with this. And so we have these two characters who are quite disparate in their background and even where they are in the world, trying to sort of find each other and solve some of the mystery that Ada has left them. So hopefully that doesn't spoil too much.
I think it's great. I will say one little thing about Pierrette. So we meet both of the characters in the first couple of chapters, and I assumed at the start that Simeon would be the protagonist and Pierrette would just be maybe just a side character just to kick off the story, and then perhaps we wouldn't hear from her again. Mm-hmm. And without saying any more, that's not true. She reappears, and we effectively follow their stories concurrently. Mm-hmm. We've almost got from if we were playing this as a video game, it would be like having dual protagonists and mm-hmm. switching between the two stories, which was great. They're different approaches, and they're different skills. Some taught from a young age, and some learned at a later age. Mm-hmm. It was great. So, did you pick that time period, that decade, that event of HMS Birkenhead as the starting point, or did you get some options from Ubisoft who said like, "Hey, we've got a gap in our existing lore here. Maybe write something there"? How did you sort of pick the period that you wanted to write in?
Mm-hmm. So what came to me was quite broad. The period itself came from Aconite and from their discussions with Ubisoft. So they came to me wanting something set in the latter half of the 19th century. And the idea, I think one of the things that appealed to them about this period, and which does inform the book as well, is the rise of political assassinations in Europe at this time. That most of the monarchs had at least one attempt on their life, and of course many of them were actually killed. And the rise of radical anarchism and communism, and the sort of ferment of ideas after the revolutions of 1848. So it was quite an interesting political time, and because assassination loomed so large in the events of history, it seemed sort of an obvious question to ask. Okay, well, where was the Brotherhood when all this was happening, and were they responsible? Were they not responsible? What were the Templars doing? So that was all that I had to work with at the beginning, was just this idea of the 19th century and this question about political assassinations. And of course, that's right up my alley. As I said, I love historical settings, but also I have a degree in political science. So I'm very interested in sort of political philosophy and history. So that appealed to me right away. So the actual events and characters were up to me, and I came up with a few ideas. And interestingly enough, actually, these two characters kind of each, these were two different pitches that I was developing, that I was thinking, okay, well, Pierrette's got an interesting story, Simeon's got an interesting story, and when I merge them together, that's when it all kind of sometimes that's the way, is you think, okay, now I can see how this will work when these two stories come together. And I just love their chemistry and their relationship with each other, as a sort of they have a sort of mentor-student relationship eventually. And
I was thinking that, or actually, do you know what I was suddenly thinking? And this will be something that if anyone's played Assassin's Creed Syndicate, it might resonate. It almost feels like sometimes older brother, younger sister kind of relationship at times.
Yeah.
Which again, that dynamic is always enjoyable to read and to imagine in your head.
Yeah. I love that dynamic. I was thinking about even for Star Wars fans, Anakin and Ahsoka. I love that.
Perfect. Yes.
I mean, although Simeon does not turn into the Dark Lord in any way, so there's none of that.
Well, but not yet.
Not yet, anyway. Not as far as we know. Yeah.
No.
But yeah, that I do love that kind of trope of the the sort of older brother mentorship dynamic is really interesting and fun. So yeah, when those two stories came together, then we were kind of off to the races. And I had a few different things in history, events and people that I thought really would help to illuminate some of the themes of the novel. That there's a lot in the novel about authority and about crumbling authority, and how people respond to that. And so the Birkenhead, for example, which I think I can talk about because it's right at the beginning of the book, so it's not really a spoiler.
Absolutely.
So that when that ship went down and became famous for the soldiers on board, just beating to quarters and not trying to save themselves, because they were sort of famous for the British stiff upper lip, and because the idea was is that if they tried to save themselves, they might end up swamping some of the lifeboats or creating some chaos that it would be better to just go down with the ship. And I think there are a few different ways of seeing that event, and certainly right after, for the next few decades, it was seen very much as a sort of tragically heroic exercise, but at the same time, the shipwreck was the focus of an investigation, and there were some mistakes that led to that shipwreck. And I think it was an interesting event to start looking at the themes of how, is anyone in charge, and are the people in charge doing a good job, and what happens when they're not doing a good job, and how do we as citizens and humans react to that? So it just seemed like a great place to start it, and it was right at the right time in the 19th century for the book.
I think one of the things that you never kind of go for like a massive exposition, but there's constant thread through the book, and there's constant references to, how can I explain it, the folly of empire, and like you said, just the folly of just following orders. And I'm guessing that you wanted to make a clear point that, do you know what, empire generally is not good. It wasn't good for most people involved. And of course, for us, we're thinking about Templars and their desire for control of humanity. But was that something you wanted to subtly hint during the story, that empire is pretty bad for most people involved?
Yeah, definitely, that was on my mind, and I think it does crop up. It almost has to crop up, because when you have something set in the 19th century, and particularly when you have several British characters and some parts of the book taking place in London, for example, it does raise the question immediately of how do you see empire, and what is the impact on history of empire, and the impact on the lives of ordinary people. And so that definitely was a theme throughout the book, and it was another thing that connected Pierret's story to Simeon's story right at the beginning, because while all this is happening to him on the far side of the world, she's at the Great Exhibition, which was this exercise in empire, and this full of bunting and ribbons and fanfares, and so there's that contrast right at the beginning of the book.
And I think, if I remember rightly, Pierret's parents they got caught up in the revolutions of 1848, didn't they?
Yes, yeah, they are killed in Paris in the revolutions before the book begins. So there's that backdrop as well.
Sorry. Yeah, and there's another character that we meet, and I won't say the name or where, and he has a small part to play, and I can't say any more because you'll know who I mean if I say it, but I don't want to spoil it. And I just thought this is a great little story that's been built up. Oh, and it's ended in a major event. And then I thought, I'm just going to Google the name, because Assassin's Creed likes to bring in historical characters as much as possible. And it was a real person. And then going back many, many years, we studied the revolutions of 1848 in secondary school. But I didn't know some of these names. And when I looked at them, I was like, oh, this is a real person. And again, this is what Assassin's Creed, and what you've done really well. You've picked little clues, little tidbits of real history, and brought it into this great story that Simeon and Pierret kind of lived through and play through, if you like. So good stuff. I wanted to ask, we've kind of touched on this already, and again, I'll try and avoid spoilers, but there's lots of small references, and like you said, little Easter eggs and so on to different games. There's a reference to a particular song in the story, and when I read it, I was like, oh, that's cool, and a little tear. Did you know about these references from your own experience of the stories, or did you get some ideas from Aconite or from Ubisoft on maybe how you could include those?
I think it was almost all from me. I'm trying to recall if there was anything that sort of was suggested from someone else. I think it was just my own, having played all of the games, but I've played a lot of them, and I've played Syndicate absolutely to completion. So I know. Whoa!
Well. Let's stop the interview there. You've played all the games.
I haven't played all of them, but most of them, yeah.
Awesome.
So I've played some of them, and I've watched my kid and my partner play others of them. So I'm pretty familiar with them.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So all those, little hints and references,
Mm,
were just
mm,
me trying to be, you can picture me chuckling behind my keyboard as as I'm doing it.
absolutely.
Syndicate was interesting because I do know that game very well, and I
Mm,
think it's my favorite so far. But um, because it's a similar time period, the book happens just before Syndicate. But I didn't, it was very clearly, we were not trying to write, the novelization of Syndicate, and there are other books that have filled in some of those gaps as well. And so it wasn't, it wasn't going to be directly related to what was happening to the Fries. But the awareness was there that obviously that is the game that is closest to this book, and some of the same characters and some of the same events are unfolding at the same time. So that was definitely in my mind throughout. And yeah, I think there are the references just almost came a bit naturally as I was, I didn't plan them in my outline as I was writing the book. Occasionally something would come to me and I'd think, this is a moment to put in a little something.
mm, mm.
And um, I'm trying to think if there was. I think so. When I was going back to my editors, I would just sort of flag things where I would say, like, just make sure that you notice that I put in something here that I don't, I don't want to accidentally cause problems for someone who's working on that thing, and oh no, I've taken their
Mm,
character and put them over
mm.
here or something like that. So I would just flag anything that I thought might affect canon in some way.
That was, you see, that's something that, again, really impressed by the story, and probably helped by picking a decade that's never been covered in other
Mhm.
media. But one of the things I was going to ask you was, this franchise has 15 years of games, comics, novels, um, short films. There's a huge amount of pre-existing story. How do you make sure that you don't that you don't disagree with all of the pre-existing story? And it sounds like you were the right person for the job, because you've played some of the games,
Mhm.
probably a fair bit of the universe. But was the editor's role to also kind of cross-check that as well then?
Yeah, and I know that there are wonderful people at Ubisoft whose job it was to read and make sure that I hadn't, inadvertently stepped into territory that would cause problems. But there was never
Gotcha.
anything that did come up that I needed to change, and it was partly just because I am an over researcher by nature. So so a lot of it was, well, now I've got a reason to read more Assassin's Creed books and
Yeah, yeah.
really get into the lore and that kind of thing. So I did try to familiarize myself as much as possible with any characters or events that might have had a bearing. For example, I haven't played Unity. My son has, and I've watched him play a little bit. And but I was, somewhat familiar with the storyline and some of the events in that
Mm,
game.
mm,
But I did go and just read a lot of summaries and that kind of thing about it, because even though my game takes place several decades later, there are chapters of the book that take place in Paris. And so I felt like I needed to know what the locations were, that and some of the history that had happened, just to make sure that I didn't sort of step in anything, or and that's also that it would inform my idea of what the Brotherhood in Paris would look like at that time, because it would have depended so much on what happened with Unity as well. So yeah, so there was a lot of the research was just sort of for that overall sense of awareness for me.
understood. I mean, as anyone listening to the show and has listened before will know, Unity is my favorite. I never miss an opportunity to say that. So when I read, there's a couple of sentences in particular which just made me think, oh, this is great. This is so
Good.
great, because it acknowledged the events that happened. What would it be, 70 or 60 years before, and
Yeah.
then it explained how the story had moved on, how that world of the Parisian Brotherhood had moved on. And there was a little reference to parkouring across the rooftops, which just again made me so happy.
Good. Yeah.
So yeah, it was great. It was great, and it's just fantastic to know that you've dabbled in some of these games, and so is your family. So was it? Does that make it more, what's the right word? Does that make it more intimidating to write for a franchise that you've already got some knowledge of, or is it better to have that pre-existing knowledge?
Yeah, I think it's both in different ways, you know. It was a little bit intimidating because, you know, when it's something that you really admire and appreciate, it's very intimidating because, you know, you want to make an offering that is going to be worthy, I guess. You know, that it's going to be a good addition to this, and you know, so there's a sense of pressure that way, that you know, this is a universe that I already enjoy and felt really privileged to be working in. So there was a sense of pressure from that. But I think at the same time, I wouldn't want to work on something that I didn't feel that way about, you know. So that that did make it easier in a sense too. That you know, it wasn't like, oh, I guess I better go write a chapter. You know, like I had a real sense of joy. You know,
Yeah,
it didn't
yeah.
feel like work. I felt you know, like very joyous to be able to write these stories. And you know, and it's a cool thing to tell my kid. You know, he's 12, and for as long as he can remember, his mom's been a published author, so that doesn't impress him at all that I have books published, you know.
Do you get the sort of the early teenage eye roll? You
Oh,
know,
definitely,
mom.
definitely, yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
He's already doing that to a large extent. um, what I found hilarious was when I published my first piece of interactive fiction for Choice of Games, and it was published on Steam. And his eyes when I told him that I was going to have something on Steam. Now
That's
that,
cool.
you know, a book is nothing, but
Yeah.
for him, something on Steam is pretty cool. So when I was able to tell him, well, you know, Mom's going to write an Assassin's Creed novel, that because he plays, you know, he's played more games
Mm,
than I have, and
mm.
you know, so that was, you know, it's always cool when you can impress your kid a little bit, although he doesn't stay impressed for very long.
Oh, I mean, it's the same here. When I joined this show, and I said I'm going to join a friend of mine and join the podcast, and they went, "Oh, that's cool."
Yeah.
And then yeah, the novelty very quickly wears off.
Yeah.
Although I did have a funny conversation a few months later, and they said, so like, how many listeners does your show have? And I said, well, I don't know. I'll have a look at the data, and the data is not perfect because it's very hard to know exactly how many listeners you've got. But I said, oh, it's about 250 on audio, and we have about 100 subscribers on YouTube. And they went, oh, wow, oh, we thought you had like 10 listeners. Oh, thanks, kids. Yeah, thanks very much. Your kids are your harshest critics, aren't they?
Definitely.
But anyway, sorry, that's off topic. But I had to have something published to Steam is pretty cool. I
Yeah.
think so. What was I going to say? Oh, my mind is thrown. So I wanted to ask a more serious question, but it was really, again, something that you did very subtly, but it's a constant thread through the whole game, and that is diversity.
Hmm.
Diversity is baked into this game. I mean, I'm just going to throw out a couple of references, and I'm sure there's more. So, you know, you mentioned already we start the story with Ada Lovelace,
Hmm.
the first a mathematical genius, and usually recognised as the first computer programmer. With her work with Charles Babbage and his different the analytical engine, wasn't it, that he never built, but she had an idea of how it could be programmed. You have a reference to how the pronoun they, which
Hmm.
is always nice to read.
Hmm.
We have a black character in the circus troupe.
Hmm.
The Parisian Brotherhood is led by a woman, and I wanted to ask you because just from the name, I would assume French, North African, Tunisia, Morocco maybe was your
Yeah, that's what I was
backstory
going
there.
for. You don't get a lot of information about that, but her name suggests that
Mm.
she's North African in origins. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Um,
again, we've got Simeon and Pierrette. We've got a
mhm,
man and a woman as sort of co-equal protagonists, if you like,
mhm,
in this story. And I'm assuming for you, you wanted to make diversity very, very central to the story.
mhm.
Was that a goal of the story?
Yeah, I think it's always in the back of my mind, you know, and sometimes in the front of my mind. It's something that I consider with everything that I write, and definitely, I think with Assassin's Creed, it's um, you know, I feel that it's a goal of the franchise. You know, I mean, I don't want to speak for the franchise by any means, but that's my impression, is that you know, it's something that they consider, and uh, you know, it's something that I consider all the time, and I do think, just as a gamer myself and as a reader, it's always wonderful if you can try to represent humanity in as complete a fashion as you can. So I tend to look for those opportunities in a way that will seem period appropriate and that will fit the story, and that is not writing entirely outside of my lane, and is not, it's still a story that I feel like I'm comfortable telling. And so often what I will do to make it a little bit to sort of increase my chances of success of not messing it up is I'll research people of the time and try to find all the stories that I can about people of the time, and invariably it will become clear that there were many women who were circus performers in the 19th century, and that were the idea of being an equestrian the way that Pierrette is, she would have been quite normal for the circus at the time. And there were definitely various people of color in the circus troops in Europe at the time as well. And there's even a reference, I think, early on in the book to the way that some of them were dressed up in furs and feathers and sort of paraded around, and that others were able to not do that, and to be sort of just acrobats like everybody else. So there was obviously, there was diversity, but there was also racism and structural barriers there as well. And so there's some reference to that. And the non-binary character in the circus troupe, Ariel, is based on just a one-line reference I found in an article about equestrians when I was looking up the research for that. And there was a reference to a performer who was billed as being neither man nor woman. And I thought, I'll put them in. So that was based on just a real historical person who I don't know very much about, but Ariel was inspired by that bit of history as well. And I think they're kind of a cool character. They don't come in a lot, but when they do, they make a big impact. So so it was definitely in my mind, and it's just something I always try to consider as much as possible. I think there's always scope for getting things wrong, but at the same time, I think it's we don't want to have a game that's just or a book that's all white men either. So
absolutely. There's enough of that already.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes everything more interesting when we get diverse perspectives and experiences and different views on the world. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So throughout the book we have we follow, how can I, again, trying to think how to explain it in a non-spoilery way. We follow Simeon extensively through the book, and we follow his journey as he meets different people, and he grows. He spends a long time, what would you say, as a student, should we say, a student of the Creed, and wrestling with what the Assassin's Creed is, what its ironies are. At one point, he makes a comment, I think it might be internal monologue, where he says, for a group that agrees with free will, I spend a lot of time taking orders. But there's a very long period, and I don't mean long for people listening, I don't mean long as in it drags on, not at all, but the book covers a number of years. I mean, Simeon takes a long time to sort of fully understand the Creed. And what I loved in particular is when he meets Amira, and she says a line to him, something like, you just needed the right teacher. And I thought, oh, that's great. I just love that little line. And what I was wondering is, how much time did you spend structuring his story and his growth and understanding of the Creed? And was that always the plan, or did you think he would kind of sign up for the Creed, I'm a member of the club, let's go? Or was it always going to be that internal growth in wisdom and growth in understanding of what he was doing and what he was joining?
Yeah, I think there were a number of reasons why he does struggle for a while, and part of it was that I wanted him, as a character. I think he comes to the book with some backstory and some internal struggles, and he's trying to sort of find his own place in the world, and for various reasons he's had difficulty with that. And so I wanted that to carry on. It seemed natural to me that it would carry on, that even when he finds the Brotherhood, he's quite questioning, and he has some strokes of bad luck as well, which kind of get in the way. So I think it seemed to fit his character that he would take a while, and uh, I do like to explore that philosophy. It's really interesting. One of the most interesting parts of Assassin's Creed to me is the philosophical underpinnings, and this seemed like a
Yeah.
great book to explore some of that. And he seemed like a good character to explore some of those paradoxes, which are really kind of at the heart of the book, I think, as well. So yeah, I think it was partly his character, and partly also because I knew I did want the book to cover quite a few years. I'm trying to remember now. I think it's about is it 12 years, something like that. It ends in the early 1860s and it begins in the early 1850s.
Mm.
So
Mm.
it's a little bit more than a decade, I think. And writing a novel that covers that span of time, it can be a bit tricky. So you do have to think about what is a character arc that will is sort of big enough that you can follow a character through that span of time, and it's going to be a big enough change in their life, that it feels like a complete coherent story, even over a decade. So Simeon sort of, finding his place in the world and how the Brotherhood fits into that seemed like it would be a way for me to tell a story that took that span of time and that allowed me then to look at those big political events that were happening in the background.
Mm. It's something that really came across. I will just say, so to people listening, so I was on holiday last week and I took this book away on my Kindle. I started reading it on the first day of my holiday. I think it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I read it nonstop until midnight.
Oh, yay.
And then I woke up. It was quite hot, and I wasn't really sleeping so well. And I woke up about 6 a.m. and I couldn't really sleep. And I thought I could go back to bed. Do you know what? Nah, I'm going to get on with the book. And I got back on. I finished it in a couple more hours. So I've never read a book so what's the right word? Addictively,
Yeah.
compulsively, maybe as this one. And I will say, for people listening, if you like Assassin's Creed for that philosophy, personally, I find it fascinating. It's definitely what I find very enjoyable from the games. If you're here for the philosophy of the assassins, there's an exploration of the Templar ideology as well. This is definitely a book for those fans, because there's great stuff in here. There really is. I would say I know this might sound like hyperbole, but it's one of the best origin stories I think we've had.
Oh, lovely.
Simeon, he's really rounded character. We understand where he's come from. We explore through the events, the main events of the book. His growth and his understanding, and what he struggles through to come out at the end. So it really is fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, he really seems to me to be a mirror for the idea of working in the darkness to serve the light. That whole idea, because he's torn internally. He wants to be in the shadows. He wants to be anonymous, and I think that's part of the reason why he joined the military in the first place, is that that sense of safety in hiding, in a sense. But at the same time, he knows that that's not satisfying for him, and he has a sort of moral compulsion to do the right thing, which involves stepping out of the shadows so often. And so I think that tension with him really was kind of a microcosm, I think, for the larger paradoxes of the Brotherhood. To get very, very nerdy, and
this is what we're here for. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that was definitely, I think getting to know him and getting to know his origin story like that, was really key for me as the writer.
One of the things that's just occurred to me, and I will just explain, I do have a long list of different bullet points and thoughts and talking points here in front of me, and one that I didn't write down, but it's just popped into my head. So let's go with it. How challenging is it to write the Templar side? Because certainly within the games, sometimes they are quite rounded characters and they give good justifications for their actions, and sometimes they're a little bit two-dimensional and they're just the bad guys there to be stabbed. So for you, how challenging or how interesting was it to make the Templars also sort of offer a fair alternative, shall we say, to humanity?
Yeah. That was interesting. It is a bit of a challenge because, you know, I think it's quite clear that the assassins and Templars are not meant to be, two-dimensional good guys and bad guys.
Mm,
Throughout all of the games, that assassins can make mistakes and do make mistakes and do horrible things, and Templars, can be motivated by the highest of ideals. So that I think came to me from the larger universe, that idea. And also I think just it's something that I've it comes up a lot. I was joking, I think, with my agent that history with factions, that's my thing, because in most of my books I tend to have kind of opposing factions that are neither good nor bad, but sort of represent different ways of seeing the world. And so that duality has always appealed to me as a writer as well. So yeah, so I found that really appealing, but it is quite tricky, uh, because you want to be have some empathy and have some roundedness in the Templar characters without letting them off the hook.
yeah,
And
yeah.
without without diminishing the how terrible the forces of order and authority um, really could be. At this time, as we were talking about earlier on, with the forces of empire and with the backlashes against those revolutions that we talked about. The way that the governments were becoming so tyrannical at this time. So yeah, so I didn't want to let that off the hook either. So it is a bit of a tension there. And yeah, I find the Templars really interesting, and I can see. I definitely also wanted to write them in a way that you could see how you would be tempted by them. You could see that there would be charming people among them, that there would be smart people among them, and that for some people, the line between the Brotherhood and the Order can become quite blurry. Not to give anything away, but there's that's another.
Ooh,
That's another. I
yeah,
was sort of
yeah.
skirting close to it, but that's another sort of thematic
Now,
thing that
see,
comes up.
now we're just teasing people.
We're
Now we're
just
just
teasing
anyway.
people.
Yeah, yeah,
But that question of what makes the Brotherhood, what makes the Order, I think is an interesting one to explore. And just I think it does come up throughout the book.
absolutely. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there's again, like we said a moment ago, just being careful.
Yes, being careful.
It's yeah. There's plenty of that in the book. One thing
Yeah.
I'll be interested to hear from our listeners is if you do, and just to clarify, we're not. As I said right at the start, we're not under obligation to make any particular recommendation here, but these are our own honest, unedited thoughts. But I will be interested to hear from people if they're interested to buy the book, and if they buy the book, what do you think? Did you get the same, what's the right word, the same excitement, the same satisfaction from reading this as I did, and Declan did, and Louise did? And I think, I'm not sure if you've spoken to him yet, but you're speaking to Michael Smith soon as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just
Um,
did. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I know he enjoyed it as well. So far, it seems to be universally everyone's really enjoyed it, which is fantastic. And I'll be interested just to hear from listeners over the next few weeks as the book becomes available,
Mm-hmm.
what their experiences are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that's been a real sense of relief to have the sort of initial reactions, and especially from people who know Assassin's Creed very well, to be welcoming the book and enthusiastic
Mm,
about it. And
mm,
because it is, as I said, it's a little bit nerve-wracking to work in this universe that's so beloved by so many people. So yeah, it's been really nice. And of course, I don't expect that everyone, there's no book that everyone loves, and people have their own opinions about it, and that's totally fine. And those conversations are for readers to have. But it has been really wonderful the way that the initial reaction has made me feel like, okay, this is all right. I can do
oh,
this.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll if I can put it in these terms. So again, for people listening who've read some, all, maybe most of the previous novels, because I mean, at the start, Assassin's Creed novels, they were kind of just retellings of the game story,
Hmm.
and then we started to have sort of more expansions, like Forsaken, which tells a story of Haytham Kenway, and then I would say the book that most people pick out as their favourite, or the most enjoyable, The one that really deeply explores this universe is Heresy by Christie Golden, which, to be fair, I think was probably published something like 8 or 9 years ago. Maybe not as long as that. Doesn't matter. Honestly, I put Magus Conspiracy up there with Heresy in terms of their storytelling and how they expand, and how they respect the storytelling and the lore. But again, they're not bashing you over the head with it. They're just stories that exist, and they really just flow really nicely. So it is a fantastic book. And I'm just reminded of something actually. So something that Declan told me the other day. Is this the first part of a trilogy?
It is, and I think I'm allowed to say that because I'm pretty sure that information exists out there on the internet.
So, I mean, obviously we'll edit this bit out if at some point in the next 2 weeks someone tells us to. But yeah, I had heard from Declan, I think also from Louise, that this is the first part of a trilogy. So can you tell us anything else?
Yeah, so I can tell you a little bit about that, which is that it is going to be part of a trilogy, and that information is kind of out there on some of the official web pages about the book. So I feel okay saying that. And if you get the book, you'll see on the cover that there's a little small print above the title that says "The Engine of History," and that's the trilogy title. So I can't tell you yet anything about the second and third books, or even who's going to be writing it, or what the story is. I have let slip before that there will be some characters from the Magus Conspiracy that will recur, so we can expect to see them again. Okay. And also I can say that there will be an announcement coming quite soon about this. So we won't have very long to wait. I expect there'll be some news about this sometime in the next few weeks.
All right, interesting. So we need to follow you on Twitter. We need to follow Aconite Books, I guess.
Definitely.
And I'm sure Ubisoft's transmedia team will announce it as well when there's news. I have questions, but I don't want to put you in a position where you go against your NDA. So maybe we'll just leave it there, that it is the first book in a trilogy. More stuff coming soon.
Yeah. And once there's things out and we can talk about it, I can talk some more. But there. I know there will be announcements coming soon, and so definitely follow Aconite and Ubisoft for that, and me. Yeah,
absolutely. I have one final question. We've kind of touched on it, but this was one that Declan wanted to ask, and as I said, unfortunately, he couldn't join us tonight. So what he wanted to ask you was, and this kind of touches on the philosophy point. So, did you always set out to have it's not just an action adventure, there is a lot of philosophy in this story. Was that always the plan from the start, or did you gradually add the philosophy and structure around action adventure first?
I think they grew together, that it was very much a holistic approach because, probably for a few reasons, but I think partly because that idea of political assassination was there at the heart of the idea from the beginning, that and we knew that one of the things that appealed to us about this period of history was the political context in Europe and the wider world. So so that really led me to think about themes of a political change, and which leads me to themes of the individual and the state, which leads you to themes about the creed and how how humans see their morality and their place within society, and all of that, I think, quite quickly and quite easily. So I think the interplay between the events of the book and the action of the book and the themes and the philosophy, it was always organic right from the start, that I was looking for events that would help me to illuminate the character growth and also the philosophical questions. And so they kind of fed each other. And then when I would find an event or a person that I thought, okay, yeah, this is an element that's got to be part of the plot, that would often then have effects on where the philosophical discussion went, from there. And there were so many interesting things happening at this time that I think it was mostly just a challenge to kind of pare it down and not go off on long tangents about railway building in the 19th century or something like that, which I could easily have done. So just sort of picking and choosing which of these things to highlight and bring to the fore, I think, was the real challenge.
So how many pages did the editor sort of chop out, do you think?
Actually, I think none. Luckily,
perfect.
Yeah, which worked really well. I think I disciplined myself enough all the way along that whenever I felt, that I would whenever I felt tempted to go off on a tangent, I held myself in, and I had a pretty strict word count to meet as well, which helped. And the fact
Oh,
that we
interesting.
had,
So you're
yeah,
set a sort of a limit then.
yeah. So I knew that I had a sort of range to hit, and so I couldn't go off in wild flights of fancy. And the fact that we had worked on the outline together as well. My editors and I had worked quite closely on an outline, so um, that helped as well, not go off the rails, so to speak. I had an idea of what each chapter had to do, and who had to be in it. But of course, there's always things that crop up, and whole, because also the book, it takes place in several different settings, and not only many years, but many different places. And so often I would have a few lines in my outline that would say, okay, well, they're in this particular city at this particular time, and this is what's going to happen. And but then I had to build that out from there in a way that was coherent and made sense for the novel, and also fit what was historically happening in that place and time as well. So there was a lot of sort of blank spaces to fill in on the map as I went through.
Mm. Actually, that's something that Declan wanted to ask as well. So, was it that historical side of what's the right word of setting the story? Did that take more research, more time, or was it the sort of the strict assassins versus Templar stuff that took more time to bring together and to create?
I think the most challenging part was really bringing them together. Making sure that everything would sort of braid together. That you take the historical events and what was happening between the two factions and what was happening between all the various characters, and have all those things fit together and come together in the right place and time at the end. That is always a challenge when you're writing a book, sometimes you have to break out spreadsheets and in a very non-artistic way.
The less glamorous side of creating.
Exactly.
I mean, we use a massive spreadsheet for our podcast as well. Spreadsheets. Anyway, oh dear,
we've turned spreadsheets into nerds are now. Magic, and sometimes you have to have them. And so I think that was the challenge was, because the historical events, I think I had earlier than most other things, because I had a sense of, okay, here are the notes that I want to hit, or here are some things that I just find really interesting about that time, and I'd like to work them in if I can. And I couldn't work in everything, but I had some basic elements there, and then sort of weaving the assassins and Templars in around that in a way that made sense. So I think, like everything else, it was sort of everything developing together and evolving as it went along.
Understood. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's the end of everything that Declan and I wanted to ask, and different talking points that we'd picked out. There are more questions I would love to ask, but like we said right at the start, we don't want to go into significant story spoilers, so maybe we'll save that for another time. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, it's a trilogy. Maybe you'll be back. Who knows?
Yes,
we can't say.
We can't say, but yes, theoretically, hypothetically, I would be happy to be back anytime, and we could talk more for sure.
That's awesome. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Kate, and agreeing to this interview from a random person on Twitter. Where can people follow you, and is there any particular work, not under NDA, that people can look forward to that like your work?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter far too often. I'm just Kate Heartfield there. Last name is spelled HeartField, and it's all one word. And I'm also on Instagram, and I am trying to make forays on TikTok. Not getting very far, but we'll, hope springs eternal. And so I'm on most social media just as my name, and I'm pretty easy to find. And I have some other books coming soon of my own work as well, but they are in that limbo where I am not able to announce them yet. Mm-hmm. So again, you can follow me for that, and I do have some other novels coming soon as well. So lots to read, and I think anyone who likes the Magus Conspiracy would definitely like my novellas that are called Alice Payne Arrives and Alice Payne Arrives, which are about time traveling highwaywomen, and they're also quite they're quite fast paced and action packed, and the embroidered book is a much bigger book and slower, but is also woven through real events of history. So it's similar in that way as well.
I will say, reading the summary for the Alice Payne books, I'm going to buy them because they just sound really interesting.
Excellent. Yeah.
I think my kids will like them as well. So unless you're about to tell me they're not perhaps for teenagers, but they
No, I
just sound
think
so fascinating that I think we'll all enjoy reading them.
yeah, they're really fun, and as I was saying earlier about the factions that crop up in my work, it's quite
Mm,
hilarious because I never considered back when I was writing those novellas that I might one day write for Assassin's Creed, but there are two factions in the Alice Payne novellas, and they don't map entirely onto Assassins and Templars by any means, but it's interesting that that was kind of in my mind already in some sense.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah.
Understood. I've got one final question that's popped into my head, and it's a bit of a cheeky question, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to. But does writing for a franchise like this, or writing for a publisher like Ubisoft, is that a sort of a significant milestone? Does that sort of open doors for the future? Do you think, or is it it's the body of work that matters
Mhm.
rather than certain individual titles?
Yeah, I think that's interesting to say. I think it does. Sort of shows that I can do something else, and whenever you have one more thing in your toolkit as a writer, I think that's always a nice thing to have, to say, okay, yes,
Mm,
I can write an universe that I did not create, and write in this sort of collaborative way to deadline and everything else. So I feel quite proud of that, just as a writer, that it's something that I'm able to do, and had a lot of fun with. Um, so yeah, and I don't know about uh, sort of what comes next. I think as a writer, you're always kind of like just ready to say yes to too many things, So I've been saying
understood.
yes a lot lately, and
Understood.
but but it's all good. It's all good stuff, and so being busy is a good thing, and it's a nice problem to have. So
Yes, indeed,
yeah,
indeed.
especially when I look back to many years ago when I had nothing to say yes to at all. So it's a nice change, and I definitely would like to do more of it, and um, it's a nice way to sort of supplement the traditional books of my own as well as a writer, and sort of build a more complete seeming career that way, I think.
Mm,
So
mm.
yeah, it's been a real positive for me.
That's awesome. All right. Well, Kate, thank you very much for joining us. I was saying us. Unfortunately, Declan can't join us. So thank you for
Yeah,
joining me.
the royal we, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Thank you for joining us on the show. It's been absolutely fantastic to chat to you today and talk about this new book. As I've said throughout the show, honestly, it's one of the most enjoyable books I've read in a long time, regardless of franchise or backstory anyway. So I hope others that are listening maybe have a read of it and enjoy it as much as I have. That's it for the show this week. This episode will go out. When are we publishing this? This will be on the 13th, so a couple of weeks' time. And in the meantime, as Kate said, you can follow her on Twitter and on social media. You can follow Declan on Twitter at AC Let's Talk. You can follow me on Twitter at James Tiddly Quid. And thank you very much for listening. We'll be back soon. Bye.